I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we're talking about our 5 favorite tips for keeping your closet organized with minimum fuss. So we're going to cover how a seasonal closet can be a key to a more organized wardrobe, some easy storage tips, and how to edit your wardrobe year-round, even if you're really lazy about it like I am. All right, so our icebreaker, Haley, today, what's your organizational Achilles heel? So what areas do you really struggle to keep organized?
I would say I'm like a fairly organized person. The thing I struggle with the most is like kid stuff. Keeping Charlie organized because there's this constant tiny tornado.
Yeah.
That's like tearing through everything. So coming up with systems that like are simple enough that she can engage in them so that like, I can have a little helper.
Yeah.
But that's just like such an ongoing struggle. I've been used to, as an adult, setting up systems and just like implementing them as part of my day-to-day life. But with a kid, that's so much harder because you have someone who's constantly undoing your work.
Yes.
And who has like different plans about the way things should be than you do. So
plans, quote unquote.
Any tips for keeping your kids' stuff organized? I mean, they're just constantly growing.
Yeah.
So like, cycling of clothes and cycling of like toys and books and things they've outgrown. It's just feels so much more constant. So that's definitely where I struggle the most currently. Mm-hmm. What about you?
Well, that brought to mind something which originally I was going to say I have trouble keeping my desk organized with all my work stuff. Mm-hmm. It tends to get very chaotic. But what you just said reminded me of all the cat and dog stuff that I have spread all over my house right now. I just adopted a rescue dog, a puppy, in July, so not that long ago. And I've never had a dog before, and there's dog stuff everywhere. And I didn't realize how much stuff dogs needed, but she's got toys just all over the place. And
yeah.
I bought all these baskets, and I kind of separated out the cat stuff and the dog stuff and cycling things out so she doesn't have, all her toys at once. It's a lot to manage. But I think that's more of a temporary problem because it's just new to me. But I would say my desk and just keeping all of my work stuff organized is always a struggle. It's always like Post-it notes and papers, and I'm kind of an analog person to some degree, so I write a lot of things down, and just keeping all of that organized is a bit of a challenge for me and not something I'm super good at. So
paper stuff is always hard for me too, like paperwork, and also I'm like a notebook and a Post-it and like notes person. So I always am afraid to get rid of my notes. I'm like, what if I need that like random out of date brainstorm?
Yeah. Yeah. And then you go back to, what is this? I don't even know what this is. I think, everyone struggles with different areas of their life and keeping them organized, even if you're a really organized person. And I think clothing is one of those areas where a lot of people struggle. I know I do in some ways. In other ways, I think I've learned a lot about keeping my closet organized, and it's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So I think as people who sew our own clothes, we might feel a little bit more compelled to treat our clothing with a little extra kindness. We might feel like we want to take care of our stuff in a way that I'm sure other people feel that way too. But I think when you sew, there's kind of a special relationship with your clothing, which is part of the reason we love sewing. So how do you balance the need to maintain your organizational systems, but not spend your whole life, organizing, pressing, and folding things?
Yeah.
Because it can be a lot to manage and maintain. So a question for you to kind of start us off on this discussion, Haley. Do you tend to be more organized in your sewing stash or in your closet, keeping your closet organized?
I would say more so in my closet than my sewing stash, because my stash feels like an active creation zone where I'm like actively creating things constantly in my sewing space. And so I'm okay with a little bit more like chaos in that area. I'm still pretty organized, but I know that sometimes you have to get messy in order to like let the creativity really like flow. But in my closet, I don't like It's definitely a creative space, but I feel more inspired by neatness there than I do in my sewing space, I suppose.
That's interesting.
Yeah, what about you?
I think I'm the opposite. My stash is pretty well organized. I have it pretty tamed. I think part of the reason that is that I have a fairly large stash, but it's not huge. Whereas I feel like I have kind of a lot of clothing and it's probably overpacked into my closet. And that makes keeping it organized a little bit more challenging just because I don't have space to dedicate for everything. Yeah. So I have a little bit of a challenge around that. But overall, my closet is pretty organized. I think both areas are pretty well organized. But definitely my stash is super organized.
Do you find that you struggle to maintain like the organizational systems that you put in place?
I don't. And I think that's because I found some really simple ones to follow. I'm not somebody who wants to spend a lot of time organizing things. It's not really my jam. I like to have things be organized, but I don't really want to spend a lot of time organizing. So I just have some real simple things that I know I can do. And I think one of those things is just making sure everything has a place to go. And I think a label maker is also really, really helpful in this, especially when it comes to my sewing stuff. Just making sure everything has a home to go to has been really helpful for me. I don't have to think about it as much. So I don't really struggle in that way. What about you?
I find that because, like you, I'm very realistic about the systems I put in place, that they're generally easy for me to maintain. In the past, I think I really have overcomplicated things because I like organizing things. And I find it like really relaxing to like spend an entire day like organizing with a fine-tooth comb. But the reality is that maintaining that level is just, for me in my life, it isn't super realistic. So I've really simplified things along the way and prioritized a little bit. And that has really helped me to maintain those systems. How do you stay motivated to keep organized?
I think for me, it's more about, I kind of remove the motivation component and just make it a thing I do, more of a habit, I guess, than something that needs to be maintained and needs that motivation. And I think that's really key for things like this for me is if you're going to rely on being motivated all the time, then it's probably going to fall apart because nobody has motivation all the time. And I think that's true for a lot of things in life that maybe are not, I don't know, maybe I won't say unpleasant, but maybe things you kind of feel like are a little bit more of an obligation or things that aren't always fun to do. I think if you rely on motivation, the same thing with like exercise, for example, if you rely on being motivated every single time you want to exercise, then you're not going to be able to build as much of a habit as if you just go out and do it, no matter what. So that's kind of my approach to things. What about you?
I agree with a lot of what you're saying. For me, I don't believe I rely on motivation either. I think with organization, it's definitely like a series of habits that I implement that help me stay on top of it. For instance, like probably one of my most impactful habits that I have is that twice a day I do like a 20-minute tidy in the morning, and at night once Charlie goes down for bed, I do a 20-minute tidy, and I focus on putting things back in their homes. And that like obviously extends to my closet and my stash. I just go through the house and make sure that things go back where they belong. And then I'm never overwhelmed by huge masses of things that need to find their homes again. Yeah. I also have a weekly cleaning ritual. I have like different zones that I clean every week, and that's where I will kind of like reset organizational systems and kind of like get a little bit more nitty gritty with things. I only give myself an hour to do it. This week, it's my dining room and my living room. So I make sure that there's no places that are gathering clutter, that everything just has like a home. And then, I do boring things like dust the cobwebs out of the corners,
Yeah. Well, that's really smart. And I feel like that kind of is a form of motivation, not wanting to deal with being overwhelmed later on.
Well, and I just don't have the time to spend like a half day cleaning my entire house every other week. So it's easier for me to do 20 minutes twice a day and have one day a week where I dedicate an hour to a specific zone. And those habits have helped me to stay organized while not like obsessing.
Yeah. And I think those can be applied to your closet too.
100%. I think that we have like some really great tips in this episode that have that same spirit. Well, why don't we jump into those tips? So I'll start us off with tip number 1, and that is to store seasonally. So if you live in a place with seasons, I highly recommend thinking about how you can store out of season clothing. I like to create systems that you can really use year round, so you aren't having to like swap things every few months. One example of this is that I have 2 underbed storage bins that I keep my shoes in, and I have one that's warm weather shoes and then one that's cold weather shoes. And it's like I'm keeping things separated. I'm keeping them by category, but it's a year-round thing that I can implement. And then also you can use different systems like consider instead of having all of your shirts in one drawer, dedicating things more seasonally. So like having your heavy sweaters in one drawer, having swimsuits, having underlayers, like wool underlayers that you need to wear in colder months, things like that. And then my other tip regarding this is to keep your really highly seasonal pieces separate or in harder to reach areas, and then you can swap them in and out. So like your heaviest winter coats or your gauziest, most lightweight summer dresses, just swapping those out, really just finding like low maintenance ways. I think that it's, for me, too much effort to swap my entire wardrobe every season. I just probably wouldn't find the time to do it. So finding like really low effort ways to make small shifts.
Yeah, I think that's really key for me too. And plus, I try to make my wardrobe in such a way that most of the things can be worn year round, I should say, across seasons. So, for example, summer dresses that could be layered with tights and a cardigan or something like that. Of course, there are always those pieces that you're never going to wear when the weather is, 180. So for example, my winter coat, obviously I'm not going to wear that in the summer. So there are always those few pieces you can put away. And I think that's kind of getting at what you're talking about, is maybe not having to go through your entire closet, but just knowing what those few things are and being able to swap those in and out in, less than an hour. I think that's a really great tip. The underbed storage, we used to have some underbed storage in our old house, but the cats really like to hang out under the bed. So it ended up just being like a little cat storage container. Basil would go into the storage container and just sleep in it all the time.
Yeah, I have to be very careful to zip them all the way, or Olive will definitely find her way in there and, make some furry deposits on my suede boots.
So it may or may not work if you have cats that like to hang out under there, depending on what kind of storage you have. The next tip is to practice safe storage. So this is something that I really try to practice, especially with my wool knitwear. So some examples are to fold your knitwear rather than hang it up. So I know some people hang up their knitwear, but it can really stretch out and ruin the longevity of your knitwear if you do that. So make sure you fold it if possible. And nesting your bra cups can also really help to preserve those as well. So there's some examples of ways you can actually store your clothing just to make them more long lasting. Another thing is to not use wire hangers. Wire hangers can also damage your clothing. So use wood hangers, for example, for your outerwear pieces, or I like those flocked hangers. Those are my favorite hangers. I just bought some new ones. It's funny. I told myself that I wasn't going to buy any more hangers, that if I used all the hangers that we have, it was time to get rid of stuff. And then the other day I was like, oh, I don't want to put away my laundry because I don't have enough hangers and I'm going to have to go through my closet and figure out what to get rid of. It's like, I'm just going to buy more hangers. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. If it's getting in the way of putting away the laundry, I think it's time.
So I'm just going to accept that I have more clothing than I need right now. But I think that's something that really makes it easier for me to store all my stuff, is to have those, because they take up less room. First of all, they're very flat, and they hold your clothing really, really well without damaging it. So if you don't have flocked hangers, that's something you can check out. They're not very expensive. And if moths are a concern for you, then you can use cedar. So cedar helps to repel moths. It actually, I think it kills the larva, or it prevents them from hatching or something like that. So you can use cedar sachets, or you can use blocks of cedar. I have a cedar chest in my house, which is Really, really helpful for storing wool stuff. So I keep some of my yarn in it, my wool yarn in it, and I keep all my wool sweaters in there because it's lined with cedar and makes it really safe for all my knits. But if you don't have that, you can use sachets or blocks. The blocks you can also get very inexpensively online, and you just kind of nest them in with your clothing, and they make ones that can be hung in your closet as well. So if you have wool coats and things like that, really great. If you have some expensive cashmere sweaters or something like that, highly recommend it, because it really sucks to go to put on your cashmere sweater for the first time of the season and it's got a big moth hole right in the center of it.
Such a bummer.
I don't know why they always go for the most expensive.
They just have good taste, I guess. I don't know.
So must taste delicious. They also make lavender sachets and things like that, which can also help to repel insects. But I definitely recommend something to help preserve your wool like that.
Okay, our third tip, which I think is my favorite tip of all of them, is to learn how to edit as you go. So I know this is something that Sarai and I both practice. We keep a box or a bag or basket that you can put things in that you want to donate kind of year round. So when you're pulling things out of your closet, getting dressed for the day, you try something on and you're like, this does not even fit me anymore. Or you come across something that you realize you have not worn in 2 years, you can put it into that basket.
Yeah.
You can treat it a couple different ways. You can treat it as kind of a purgatory, put that garment in timeout, and then revisit it again later in a few months when you go through all of your purgatory items. Or it can just be a straight up donation pile. But I find that this is like such a low effort way to cull my wardrobe year round, so that when it comes time to do a little reorganization, closet reset, it makes it so much less work.
Yeah. I think another thing that can help with that, if you struggle with getting rid of things like me, is I like to have a clothing swap or something like that, so that I know the clothing is going to somebody who's going to love it and appreciate it. So
Yes.
if there's something like that that motivates you a little bit more, whether it's selling your clothing so you get a little money for it, donating it is great. I think there's a lot of questions about where your donations go and whether it's really helping people or not. That's something that, you can investigate depending on where you do your donations, where you donate to. But if, doing a clothing swap or giving it as a hand-me-down to someone or selling it on, Poshmark or eBay or something like that is more motivating to you, then that's something to consider too.
Yeah, you make a great point. To add to the editing as you go, I think in addition to this, it's important to schedule time. You can do this as often as you like. I find that doing it twice a year, scheduling a time to go through your closet is really helpful, because the more often you do it, the less daunting it becomes. If it's just an hour and a half that you spend every 6 months instead of like a whole day every few years. To me, I find that easier to motivate myself to do a smaller task like that. And then my next tip regarding a closet clean out is I recommend never getting rid of out of season stuff when you're doing a closet clean out. I feel like I've definitely made mistakes when cleaning out my summer dresses in the middle of winter, when it feels like I've never worn that dress before and I will never wear it again. And lo and behold, summer comes eventually, like it always does, and you might have some regrets. So just learn from me. Don't do that.
Yeah. I mean, there's some questions you can ask yourself too that I think help about, maybe you don't wear it, but maybe it's something that you love and you just need to kind of re-envision it or think about how you would wear it, things like that. I have recently, it was my sister's birthday and we went out for dinner and I wore this dress that I got at a thrift store. Actually, it was an antique store, I guess, years ago. I don't think I'd ever worn it before. And it was so pretty. It was a really pretty dress, but it was silk. And it was just like, I didn't really have a lot of opportunities to wear it. And it was definitely a summer dress. It wasn't something I could really wear in the winter. So I had like this limited window and limited occasions on which to wear it. And I'd never worn it. But once I saw it in my closet, I realized that this would be perfect for this occasion. So I think sometimes there are things that you might not wear often, but depending on how fancy they are, depending on how much thought you've put into how to wear them, that kind of thing, this might just give you an opportunity to rethink what's in your closet as well.
Definitely. I have found things in my closet when doing closet cleanouts that, just like you are saying, that I love, but I never wear. And that gives me the motivation to like spend a little time, maybe researching, finding some inspiration for outfits that I can build around the piece, giving myself the challenge that I'm going to try wearing it 3 different ways that month. And that can be really helpful. Even if after that exercise you find that you really aren't finding a way to work it in and you don't like it as much as you thought you did, giving it a little extra effort before you give up on it can be helpful.
I really like that idea of coming up with a few different outfits you could wear with it. It just made me think this dress is like very pretty and it's actually pretty simple. And if I put a sweater over it, it would just look like a pretty skirt. I feel like I hadn't even really thought about wearing it that way until we talked about it. So I feel like doing a little bit of planning like that can be part of your process too. So our next tip, this is one that I really like, and I feel like this is really, really helpful to me, which is to make your closet look like a fancy department store or a fancy boutique that's made just for you. So by that, I mean keeping your stuff organized in such a way that it feels really special and it feels like a place you want to go to get dressed. So you can do this by organizing by color, by garment type, by short or long sleeve. It really depends on how you like to keep your clothing organized. For me personally, I keep all my garments first by garment type. So I have my dresses together, I have my tops together, I have my shorts, my skirts, and my pants together. And then I organize by color within that. So I have all of my black dresses towards one side, and then, it goes on. I have like a little rainbow, though mostly it's neutrals in my closet. But that really helps me to feel, not only does it make the clothing feel more special when I go to get dressed, but it also really helps me to find what I need when I need it. So it just makes getting dressed a lot faster and a lot easier when you do it this way. So make sure that the categories that are in the heaviest rotation in your closet are the easiest to access. And then the things that you don't wear as much can be kept towards the back or in the places that are a little bit less accessible. So for example, for me, I have sort of my dress up fancy stuff all the way in the back. I have some vintage things that I don't wear very often kind of in the back. And from there, my everyday clothes are organized. So those are kind of kept separate. And that works for me because that area of my closet is a little less accessible, but I don't need it as often. Same thing with heavier sweaters, with just things that I don't wear as often, fancy shoes, heels, things like that I can keep on shelves kind of closer to the top and get them down only when I need them. So that's really helpful for me.
Another benefit I like from organizing by garment type and garment color is that it's really helpful when you were doing wardrobe planning exercises to be able to see kind of this snapshot of the categories and the color palette of your closet.
Yeah.
You might find that in your mood board, you have all of these like beautiful warm neutrals. And then when you go and look at your closet, it's filled with black and blue. And that can give us some like really interesting clues and insights into our sewing habits as well.
And what you actually wear. Yeah. I think that's one thing a lot of people struggle with is you are attracted to certain clothing or certain fabric or certain colors, but when it comes to actually wearing those things, you shy away from it. And that's just a good thing to know about yourself.
Yeah, the way that we store our clothing and our fabric stash, and I think that it all plays like a really valuable role in our sewing practice in general. It's kind of this ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
All right. And we have our final tip, which is don't forget about the small stuff. I think that it's really easy when you do a little closet clean out to focus on where you're putting your dresses and your blouses and your jeans and all of that. But also our wardrobes are made up of other components like shoes, accessories, hats, scarves, all of that kind of stuff. And just making sure all of the small things have homes and ought to be fancy homes. Something that I like to do is that I'll just use cardboard boxes, shoe boxes, whatever, as temporary homes to things, because there's nothing I hate more than going to like Target or World Market, buying a bunch of like containers to store things in. And then I feel like I've just contributed more to clutter. By using something kind of temporary and making a really good inventory of the kind of storage you need, you'll end up creating like better, smarter systems for yourself. And be really realistic. For me, for instance, I love silk scarves. I collect them. But I also know myself, and I know I'm not going to spend time like folding every single silk scarf into a perfect little square and putting them neatly into a drawer. I just have a big old box that I keep all of them in, and I don't bother with folding them nicely or anything. So just like being realistic, where other things like my necklaces, I will take the time to like hang them up a little bit nicer, make sure nothing's getting tangled.
Yeah. Personally, I have a couple just cardboard shoe boxes sitting on shelves in my closet. And one of them has my tights, which are just folded in there. And another one has my scarves, my silk, or, lightweight scarves and bandanas and things like that, folded and just stacked horizontally in the box. And that's fine. That's enough. I never felt like I needed to buy something specific for those. So I follow Marie Kondo's advice on that and just use what I have.
Yeah, totally. Coming from the girl who still keeps her thread in a shoebox, I co-sign that decision 100%.
All right. So we've gone through some good tips today that hopefully have been helpful for you too. So I'm just going to recap them really fast. So our 5 tips were: 1, to store seasonally. So if you do live in a place that has distinct seasons, think about how you can store your out of season clothing. Number 2 is to practice safe storage. So make sure you're storing things in such a way that it's going to preserve what you have. Number 3 is to edit as you go. So rather than having to do these big editing sessions, make sure that you're setting yourself up for success by just doing a little bit at a time and giving yourself some ways to do that. Number 4 is to make your closet look like a fancy department store by keeping everything organized in such a way that you can see what you have. And number 5 is not to forget about the small stuff and make sure you have some places or some systems in place to organize your small things and accessories as well. So, what's your big takeaway from today's episode, Haley?
I think that my big takeaway is that my secret to staying pretty organized is to not overthink it and not overdo it. That simplicity is really key to creating something that you're going to maintain on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I think that's where I tend to fall down if I don't follow that advice, making things harder for myself than they need to be. And I mean, that's true in so many areas of life. Why make things harder than they need to be?
Yeah.
I think my big takeaway from this, just kind of as a reminder for myself, is to schedule that time to go through the closet and do just that bare minimum swapping for the season. I think that's something that I haven't done in about a year or so. But I do think instead of making it into a big deal, instead of making it into like, oh, I need to go through my whole closet and swap everything out for the season, just think about what are those few things that I can put away and not have to have them taking up space when they don't need to be.
Make a reoccurring calendar event. That's what I do for everything.
Good idea. All right. So if you're feeling a little lost while editing your closet, maybe you could check out our style workshop. Our style workshop is a hands-on workshop that walks you through some exercises that help you to identify your core style. So it's a really great process to go through before you tackle any other wardrobe planning. And it's free for Seamwork members, but if you aren't a member, it's only $10. And again, it's free for Seamwork members. And if you want to join Seamwork, remember that podcast listeners get 50% off our annual membership at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And that gets you access to the style workshop as well as design your wardrobe and lots of other goodies, including hundreds of sewing patterns. So if you want to check out the style workshop, you can check that out at seamwork.com/go/style-workshop. So that's seamwork.com/go/style-workshop. And if you liked this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. We'd really, really appreciate it. And we really appreciate all the wonderful reviews that we've gotten so far. It just makes our day to read those And just want to thank everybody who has taken the time out of their day to say something positive. It's really, really appreciated. And if you want to leave us a 5-star review and you want to ask us a question in it, we'll answer it on a future show. So if you have any kind of question you'd like to ask us, just leave a 5-star review and put your question in there and we'll use it on a future show. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount. And again, you can find that at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. All right, that does it for us this week. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.